country's government saying it will not budge in issuing Atul Gupta a passport. The family fled the country 3 years ago. They've applied for their South African passports to be renewed. Last year, the US Treasury announced it had sanctioned Rajesh Gupta, Atul Gupta, Ajay Gupta and Salim Essa for their alleged involvement in corruption in South Africa. The immigration expert, Gary Eisenberg, joins me now for more on this. Gary, good evening to you. If you hold a South African passport, when can the Home Affairs Department, or the Minister in this case, decide it's not going to renew it or give you another one?
Well, the Public Protector's report doesn't come out with every South African passport holder. A few weeks ago, I remember speaking to you about this, the Public Protector issued a report suggesting, finding after an extensive analysis and investigation, that the information put to the Minister then, Malusi Gigaba, by the Gupta brothers, including Atul and Ajay, to obtain South African citizenship in a more speedy way, despite the fact that they didn't comply with the residence requirements, was unfortunately not fully investigated or investigated properly by departmental officials, and that some of that information was in fact corrupted and not true. And that is really the reason the current Minister of Home Affairs is now bulking at recognizing the legitimacy of the Gupta citizenship.
So if the Home Affairs Minister decides to revoke your passport or not renew your passport in this case, is that exactly the same as revoking your South African citizenship? So does this mean once this passport expires that Atul Gupta or Ajay Gupta are no longer South Africans?
No, there has to be an act of withdrawal of the underlying South African citizenship status, because the underlying application was perhaps faulty in some way, or the information lacked veracity, it wasn't correct, it wasn't true, wasn't properly verified by departmental officials, and citizenship might well have been issued corruptly or by error, administrative error. Then, of course, those are grounds on which the Minister has the power to withdraw citizenship. Now, with regard to the withdrawal of a passport, a non-South African citizen, in other words, if the underlying citizenship status has been withdrawn, then that person, not being a citizen, cannot carry a South African passport in terms of the passport legislation. The person is not entitled to utilize South African passport facilities. And that's really the reason why the government doesn't want to renew the passport. I think they have mishandled the public relations aspect of this. It's really not the passport that's at issue at all. It's the underlying South African citizenship status that is the major issue here.
Okay, I'm slightly confused, and I realize that happens, on an hourly basis. But the point I'm trying to get to then is, would it be fair to say that the Guptas are South Africans until their passports expire, or are they not South Africans now?
Well, I'm not aware of the Minister of Home Affairs exercising his power in terms of the South African Citizenship Act to withdraw their citizenship. That citizenship status has been impugned in the Public Protector's report. The question which arises is what action in terms thereof has the Minister taken? And really that is the issue. If he has lawfully withdrawn or otherwise cancelled, if there is such a thing, their underlying South African citizenship status, then of course the question of a passport becomes moot, because a passport can only be issued to a person who is a South African citizen.
Okay, so at the moment, if I've got this correct, so the Guptas, with their passports, can go to the consulate or embassy in Dubai, because they refuse to come here, although we would like to see them again. But they can go and actually vote in one of our elections, so they can exercise that right. But our government can't say to them, you have to come home.
Absolutely. There are two different aspects. A South African citizen can be holed up in Tokyo, protecting himself or defending himself against an extradition request from the South African government to come and face criminal charges in this country. And being a South African citizen won't particularly help the South African government in getting him here. So these are very, very different aspects, completely different issues. The Guptas being wherever they are, in India or in the UAE, counting themselves, deeming themselves as South African citizens until that South African citizenship status has been somehow lawfully annulled. Now, going to court and trying to review the minister's decision not to renew a passport document is on the basis that they remain a South African citizens as far as they are concerned, because I don't believe that South African citizenship has been annulled in any way. So that is really the elephant in the room. What has the minister done as a consequence of the Public Protector's report or otherwise to annul their South African citizenship status? Without doing that, they are South African citizens and they are eligible to obtain South African passports and utilize South African passport authorities because this is a constitutional right.
Okay, so they can exercise their constitutional rights outside of the country, but we cannot impose any obligations on them. That's how it seems tonight, at least.
Well, that's exactly right. If, let's say, Mr. Smith is a South African citizen and he sits in London somewhere and he's subject to a South African extradition request, being a South African citizen, he still has the right to defend himself against being extradited back to South Africa, even though he's a South African citizen, if he has the right to remain in the UK, utilizing their extradition legislation to defend himself. So being a South African citizen doesn't speak to whether or not the South African government can force him to return to this country.
If I were a lawyer for the Guptas, and I'm not, but if I were, and they were absolutely desperate to keep their South African citizenship, they, as I understand it, I think are still citizens of India. If they revoked their citizenship of every other country and only had South African citizenship, there are constitutional court rulings in our courts that say you cannot be rendered stateless. Would that actually complicate the picture somewhat? Would that make it impossible for South Africa to revoke their citizenship?
I don't think it will assist the Guptas at all. There is a sort of a legal principle that if there are means by which the South African government can assist an individual not to be stateless, then that's what it's got to do. But if the South African government annuls or withdraws or otherwise does not recognize the citizenship status of a particular individual, and as a consequence thereof, that individual becomes stateless, our law would allow that. There's no problem with that at all.
Gary Eisenberg, it's a fascinating discussion, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed. Really do appreciate it. The immigration expert and attorney there with you on the pulse.